Okay, so I was born in April of 1998. My birthday is April 28th. And when I was researching some of the things that happened in the month of my birthday, it was pretty surprising to see like all this stuff that was happening in the month I was born and that I didn't hear about, and even some things that happened on my birthday as well. And I noticed that there was a lot of like damage and crimes done during my birthday month. There were some good things too, but yeah, a lot of them. I got like 5 different um, like crime things that had happened during my birthday. But so the first thing I found was on April 1st, there was the death of somebody called Christopher Alder, and he was a trainee for a computer programmer position, but he was also formerly part of the British Army. And this case about him became about civil rights. He was a black man, and he was assaulted after leaving a nightclub, and he was taken to Hull Royal Infirmary for his injuries. He had suffered a very bad head injury, and that led to some troublesome behavior that the staff was relating it to. And he ended up being arrested by 2 officers at the hospital to prevent breach of peace, which is a form of disorderly conduct. The officers actually half dragged and half carried him into the custody suite, and he was handcuffed and unconscious, so they were not treating him the best during it. They suspected that he was faking his illness and faking his head injury, and he wasn't actually ill at all. But 12 minutes later, one of the officers had noticed that he stopped breathing. They attempted to save him, but could not, and announced his death at the scene. And it began to surface that the head injury alone was not enough to kill him. So people were speculating about the treatment that the officers had given him. And the 4 officers that were with Alder when he died were found guilty of the most serious neglect of duty. So those officers have suffered charges and I believe have lost their jobs since then. On April 5th, the Kua hostage crisis happened, which was an 18-year-old man named Hector Dort. He attempted to rob a bakery with a handgun in Cuba, Venezuela. His robbery went wrong, so he fled the building when the police officers had shot him in the arm, and he went to a residential building where he found a family, and he took them hostages. Her name was Nancy Lopez, and her family, which he ended up killing 2 of her family members, and one of them was a 9-year-old boy, and he left them to bleed out. He took Nancy outside of the building, and the police officers and him had a 7-hour standoff, and he was basically threatening that he was going to kill her if he didn't get a car to be able to escape the scene with. The police had tried to reason with him, and one of the officers ended up taking it into his own hands and was able to shoot Hector in the head and save the hostage, and his death was actually caught on camera as well. So on April 6th, I have that Pakistan tests missiles to hit India. These were just like tests that both the countries were running back and forth with each other, and they were like medium-sized missiles that they were testing. Also, I found that He Got Game was the top movie, which personally I have never seen, but it was the top movie mainly around the month of April. The top video game was Aliens Online, which again I have never heard of before. The top song was Casey and JoJo, called All My Life. And then the top book, which I found really interesting, was The Man Who Listens to Horses, and I'm a big horse person, so I was pretty excited to see that that was one of the top books back then. But on April 9th, I have the Dunwoody tornado, which hit Georgia, and it was a strong tornado, which was categorized as an F2, and that was basically like the strongest that they had seen in their area, and it hit 4 counties that were very high populated, but the hardest hit was Dunwoody. which had given the tornado its name. The storm that brought the tornado was categorized as an F5, which is very, very strong, and killed 32 people. It also hit very close to Atlanta as well, so Atlanta's a huge city in Georgia. And it was strong enough that it was able to pull roofs off of houses and buildings and destroy the frames. So houses actually were collapsing because of it. On April 11th, I was looking at the sky, and that was the full moon in April that we had. April 12th was the earthquake in Slovenia, and it was a 5.6 on the Richter scale, which is like a medium-sized earthquake. It did damage, but it wasn't the worst that they had ever seen. Also on April 12th, I have Madison Alamia, who was born, and she is a pop singer. I don't really know too much about her. I don't think she's as popular today, but and then Pandora was the top book during this time, which I have actually heard of. Another interesting thing was Spice World was the top rented movie. So that was a movie about the Spice Girls. And then a TV series called Push was the top. So for April 24th, I found a middle school dance shooting. And it took place in Edinboro, Pennsylvania, and it was at a banquet facility called Nick's Place. And what surprised me most about this was it was actually a middle school dance. So the shooter was 14 years old, and it was a dance for 8th graders, so these kids were young. His name was Jerome Worst, and he killed a 48-year-old and wounded another adult and 2 students. He was described as a normal person before the shooting, but he was a bit of a loner. And other students had claimed that right before the shooting he became cold and unfriendly. And someone had also reported the shooter saying that he wanted to kill people and commit suicide. He also had showed another student his gun that he kept in his dresser. But he was sentenced to 60 years of prison, and he also had no record of mental health issues, which I found a bit surprising. On April 28th, which was actually the day I was born, a girl named Arlene Frazier vanished. She was a 33-year-old woman. She was a mom, and she vanished, and they still have not found her body or any trace of her or what happened to her. But they did convict her husband of murder. So I don't think they really know for sure what happened to her. They still haven't found anything with her, but her husband is convicted. And then on April 30th, I have that Daniel V. Jones. He was a man that actually committed suicide on TV. So basically what he did was he parked his pickup truck on a very busy highway where a lot of people were driving, and he set it on fire and pretty much blew it up, and then he committed suicide. And this was all on TV in Los Angeles. And when police were trying to figure out what drove him to do that, one of his friends came out and said, I don't know how many people know this, but he had cancer. So he had noticed a growth on the back of his neck, and Daniel had told his friend that he had cancer. It didn't really say what kind of cancer he had, but he did have cancer, which kind of drove him to do that. So those are the events that I found, and they were actually very interesting, and I was really surprised by how much had happened in the month I was born. And it was just it made me depressed looking at it on how much crime had happened. I didn't really see, other than a lot of sporting events, I didn't really see too many very good things that had happened, which is why I threw some of the top movies and top books, the horse one that I was pretty interested in. But it was very surprising to me to read about this, and had I not, I guess I would have never known all the stuff that did happen in the month I was born.